That's far enough, thank you. Admiral Val froze. A voice unlike any he had heard played through the ship's loudspeakers, the ones typically reserved for the AI making replies or summons. The voice spoke in perfect Beluian, but it was most certainly alien in nature. The accent and pitching were off, so it definitely wasn't any of his kind. Admiral Val turned and issued a smoldering glare at his communications officer, prepared to rip into him for not notifying the captain of an incoming transmission, only to realize his communications officer was just as surprised as he was that this message came through, on the PA speakers no less. The communications officer looked up from his terminal and back to the Admiral, issuing his species equivalent of a shrug. What in the... Val began muttering to himself again when the voice spoke once more. Yeah, there you are. I got your attention. The alien voice said despite its origins, Val could still place a hint of confidence behind this alien's words. Did this interloper somehow hack into his warship's interfacing systems? No. Impossible. What is this? Who are you? The Admiral demanded, looking vaguely upwards towards the speakers. Val was only half expecting the voice to answer, still unsure if this voice's host could hear him back. Oh, I think you know exactly who I am. Val turned towards the bridge technician who had just entered, seemingly already briefed on the situation. They began rushing towards the communications console to attempt to cut out this hacker. Before they could, all eyes of the crew were suddenly drawn to the central holographic display of the bridge which, seemingly of its own command, powered on. This holographic display was for battlefield analysis, granting the captain, or in this case the Admiral, a better overview of any battle that was to take place as well as any potential environmental hazards and celestial objects to be accounted for. And behold, it did just that, displaying the system Vao's invasion fleet was currently in, a unary star system with 9 major celestial objects, countless moons, and even more numerous were the smaller celestial objects that made up 3 asteroid belts in the system. A small formation of highlighted markers labeled in red indicated his fleet, just beyond the largest of the 8 planets, making headway toward the system's 3rd planet, where a suspected primitive civilization lay waiting to be conquered. Sure enough, the hologram zoomed in on the 3rd planet. The model wasn't detailed, only giving the approximate size of both it and its abnormally large moon. Not that it mattered, however, the message the interloper was trying to send was clear. Val straightened up and composed himself, donning a new air of confidence himself. Oh my, I must say, for a primitive monkey like yourself, you gave me quite the startle. A fright even, Val chuckled to himself. Regardless, the novelty of such stunts has swiftly worn off. However you managed to tailor that AI into translating your primitive monkey barking into something sophisticated will scarcely matter on the battlefield. Surrender now, ape. This is your first and only warning. Val was pleased with how he had conducted himself and was fully prepared for the primate to submit to his, and more importantly, his species' superiority. Either that or the primate would make the foolish decision to resist, which was fine by him either way. Instead, the Admiral's terminal opened up a new application window, drawing Val's attention back to his own station. The window buffered for a few moments before a live video feed began to play. What appeared was a human, at least a being similar to what the preliminary reconnaissance reports showed. It was a primate of sorts, with very little fur, even on top of its head where the biological reports suggested it would contain the vast majority of it. The human had its feet propped up on some desk not too dissimilar from Vao's terminal, right next to the camera with some crude metal contraption in his hands, likely the equivalent of a Lex board for Vao and his crew. The being was clothed in gray, baggy fabrics that covered everything from the primate's shoulders to their feet, which were just out of view. Some headset was positioned right atop their cranium, with a firm wire positioned in front of the human's mouth. The human turned to face the camera and spoke. There we are. I figure it's easier for you to fully grasp who you're working with if you can see them, yeah? The human said, his mouth seemingly disconnected from the voice that came through, confirming Vao's suspicions of a translator AI. Despite this, Vao found himself in a half-stunned state. A mix of indignance and nervousness were fighting for rights to the Admiral's emotional state for a number of reasons. Where he was expecting to at least see someone resembling a dignified official, Perhaps a high-ranking politician or military commander, he found this. Someone who didn't have the proper decency to dress with fitted apparel or compose themselves with respect, instead kicking their movement appendages up onto their desk and getting as comfortable as possible. Vao composed himself quickly. Hideous gorillion, absurd well-ape, bring me your leader. I demand someone who can accept my demands, not some dejected what I can only assume to be failure in your society. The Admiral shouted, allowing impatience to begin to take over. The human stared at him for a moment. Just as Vao was about to speak once more, the human sat up straight, removing his legs from the desk and setting them on the floor. Sure thing, the primate said. He then gripped the armrests of his chair and kicked off the floor, revealing his chair was built on a swivel. The primate spun a full 360 degrees before settling back into a posture that radiated arrogance, resting their cranium on one of their balled-up hands. Calvin Kane, ruler of everything speaking. Now Vao's blood began to boil. Final warning, human. Relay me into contact with your pathetic species government, or the blame for your race's annihilation will be upon you. All right, the human conceded, putting their hands up to about their head's height. Seriously, I am the guy in charge. What do you want? The human now assumed a more relaxed pose, though one that still resonated with an air of professionalism, despite the human's tainted clothes and disheveled domicile behind him. Admiral Vao opened his mouth to issue a rebuttal, but at the last second decided that trying to press this human anymore would be a fruitless endeavor. He was talking to the human equivalent of a Caliosphere ogre. Have it your way, human. I was considering offering a complete enslavement of your species, but I suppose settling for 25% will have to do. Let's see how your pathetic species crumbles against the might of the Themisian Empire. Admiral Vao attempted to press the hang-up button, but found that since the human was not technically using proper comm software, the button was effectively useless. After a few more attempts at trying to block the human, Admiral Vao slumped back in his chair, defeated. How about no? The human, Calvin Kane, was it? Asked, though the translator made it sound as though it were a rhetorical question. Perhaps it was. Vao turned back toward the camera, frustration creeping back into his voice. What? Vao grumbled in barely contained rage and indignation. How about instead of... What? Launching an incursion on those weaker than you, you turn tail and crawl back to whatever cosmic wormhole you came from so we can all just get on with our lives, Calvin proposed, now slowly oscillating in his chair. Vao took a moment to process what was just said before a new emotion crept in. Mirth. Vao began to laugh, or what his species' substitute for laughter was. After a few moments, Vao finally calmed down, though his laughter was still in part echoed by the other members of his bridge crew who had overheard their conversation. Now that is funny. Perhaps we may spare you, monkey, and keep you as a subject of ridicule, you and your jests. Vao's face dropped as he recomposed himself into a posture of professionalism and indignance. Foolish human. Your species is barely even void-born. What hope could you have at repelling our invasion? You are in no position to negotiate. The Admiral then turned back towards the bridge technician. Can someone get this blasted monkey off of my terminal? He barked. The technician winced and signaled that he was working on it. Vao huffed. His patience was already running thin. If anything, this human had succeeded in giving him a headache. Oh, but I am in a position to negotiate, you vile pile of bile and what substitutes for brains, the human stated confidently. Vao turned back to his terminal, suppressing his irritation as he tried to maintain composure. Oh, really, monkey? You don't even have faster-than-light technology. How much should I bet that you don't have antimatter weaponized? Let me guess. Your homeworld is still divided up into independent factions. Oh, do tell me how you plan on stopping such a vast and mighty war fleet such as my own. Simple, like this. Calvin extended one of his fingers out and pressed a red button on his desk that Vao had failed to notice until now. Suddenly the bridge was engulfed in a massive flood of light that forced the personnel present to avert their eyes. The light dimmed, replaced by a thermal explosion's warm glow, rapidly dissipating just several clicks from the flagship. One of the fleet's destroyers was just struck and pulverized, Val was put into a similar state of shock as the rest of his bridge crew, but was the first to compose himself. "Status report. What happened?" the Admiral shouted. "All systems online. We weren't hit." The ship's shieldmaster responded a moment later. "The Iron Wind has been hit. Catastrophic damage. Her escape pods have been automatically engaged," the tactical officer shouted. Val momentarily re-entered a state of shock. He didn't even see what struck the ship. It happened so fast. "Do we have any idea what hit it? Search for targets now." The Admiral turned towards the intel officer. "No, nothing. I'm picking up signals from across their inner asteroid belt, but these readings indicate mining platforms. Nothing powerful enough to strike us that hard and fast. Shields up, defensive positions. Transmitting orders. Fleets responding. Diverting power from thrusters. Shields are at full capacity." The bridge was a flurry of activity as everyone returned to their stations after being thoroughly shaken by this sudden and devastating attack. Once the order had returned to the ship's bridge, Val turned back to the terminal where Calvin was reclining in his chair, wearing the biggest shit-eating grin he could muster. "You received my package?" Calvin asked, his condescending tone perfectly matching his face. "You!" Val seethed. "Impossible! How did you do this? Tell me, monkey." "Of course. What you've been struck by is a little invention of mine. A rather powerful tool of sorts. I may eventually reconfigure it into some means of interstellar transit, but at its core it is a relativistic kill vehicle." "Elaborate. Now." "So you know how you're able to effectively travel faster than light speed. Well, in real space, there is a way to get close, but not at light speed. Since there's no air resistance or strong gravity in void space, all I have to do is keep the engines of my missiles running as they make constant laps around my system's star, or in this case, gas giant. These are speeds even you couldn't even begin to reach in real space." Calvin made a motion, a gesture of some sort. Val couldn't see to where, but it was likely the human was pointing at the titanical gas giant that his fleet was currently passing by. Calvin then returned his gaze back to the camera, where he suddenly dropped his carefree demeanor and took on a more composed expression to mirror Vao's. "Let's drop the charade. I've been watching you for some time. You're not exactly easy to miss with all of your FTL jumps around my homeworld. As such, I've been preparing for a couple 100 years, building up defenses and so on." "Lies, human. I know your kind's lifespan isn't that long," Vao countered. "Maybe, but cloning machines do wonders for immortalizing a person. Point is, you're now in a difficult situation. By now you've certainly noticed all of my drones' activity out in the asteroid belt. Well, while most of those assets are mining operations, there are also weapons platforms there as well, hidden, but they're there. All in all, my preparations have led to the construction of about 900 of these RKVs, very similar to the ones I just showed you, with more being added every month." The human finished, once more reclining back in his chair with a satisfied grin on his face. Val froze and considered the human's words. "How many of these missiles did you say, human, do you possess?" the Admiral inquired. 900. "Why?" Calvin answered, confusion detectable in his voice. Val suddenly burst out laughing, clearly forced, but the message got across. "Oh, monkey, you are a master of empty scares. While I admit that your demonstration is unexpected, impressive even, for a species as underdeveloped as yourself, even if your claims of such a stockpile are true, which I doubt. My fleet is an impressive titan of industrial aptitude, boasting over 70,000 ships. We are more than prepared to account for more losses, but what you would be striking is a mere fraction of our fleet count. That is, if your claims are not simply bluffs." Val retorted, still chuckling beside himself. The Admiral was about to give the order to return to course when Calvin spoke once more. "What you speak of is true, Admiral. Your ships do vastly outnumber my arsenal, and I could not possibly hope to eliminate the threat approaching my home planet. But that's not what they're there for, nor what they're currently targeting," Calvin stated. Vao's interest piqued once more. "Truly?" the Admiral asked in a mocking tone. "You're making my mission even easier. So do tell, monkey. I shall humor you this last time. What are you aiming them at?" Val waved his hand for his bridge crew to begin returning to the projected route. How about the 112 inhabited exoplanets I found on your ship's databank? And froze. The bridge around him seemed to go quiet as Calvin's words were magnified. Everyone turned to face the Admiral's terminal. Val stared for a few moments before realizing the entire bridge's attention was on him. He cleared his equivalent of a throat before turning back to Calvin. Could you repeat that? Certainly. You see, when I hacked into your ship, you have miserable cybersecurity, by the way. I didn't just break into your speaker system and your bridge communication relays. I got into the ship's central server systems. I must say, you keep a lot of interesting data. Weapon blueprints, manifests, ship names, commanding officers, troop counts, health diagrams, and of course, star maps containing every colonized exoplanet across 94 systems. Noticing Vao was locked in a state of uncertainty, Calvin continued, "And I should also point out that my little demonstration, as you called it, really didn't do these weapons justice. Each one of these relativistic missiles is designed to shatter entire continents with kinetic energy alone. That little ship, a destroyer, yes, was merely a close target to get your attention." "And how fast are these speeds?" Admiral Vao inquired, starting to grow nervous for the first time in as long as he could remember. "Well, the shot I hit you with was around 20% the speed of light. However, given enough time, fuel, and space for acceleration, say over the vast light-years distance between star systems, it's possible to reach a devastating 85% the speed of light with my current access to technology, though it is theoretically possible to reach 98% the speed of light with the same payload." Vao shook his head. "No, impossible. You're lying. Whether I'm lying or not is irrelevant. What matters is if you are willing to take that risk. I'm making a bold claim, yes, but I've already demonstrated that it's not out of the realm of possibility. By refusing to listen to me, you are taking a significant gamble, a gamble that places the lives of however many billions on the line. So you tell me, Admiral Vao, are you willing to take that risk?" The Admiral paused. The human made a point that even he found hard to argue against. He thought for a moment before shaking his head. "Say what you will about your missiles, human, but we can always move faster than any craft you can fire at us. We'll conquer your homeworld and be back with plenty of time to prepare for the oncoming barrage." The Admiral boasted, knowing that even the human couldn't overpower technology he didn't have. "Correction, you can move effectively faster than anything I could send through space. And this seems true. Your subspace engines, fascinating pieces of technology, by the way, I'm salivating to dissect these blueprints, do allow you to bend space-time and travel at a significantly greater speed than light. However, I will mention that real space is much different from subspace. You will not be able to catch up to my missiles and intercept them. All you'll see is a flash, and then the surface of your planet lighting up before dismantling itself like a dropped porcelain plate," Calvin declared with confidence. Vao became flustered. This human, a primitive monkey from some backwater world at the ass end of the galaxy, seemed to know more about FTL than a well-experienced Void Admiral did. The Admiral thought for a moment before an idea struck him. "We can still evacuate our worlds before your weapons come. We may not be able to save our worlds, but your primitive sticks will never strike our population," the Admiral argued, more to himself now than to the human. There was no way this ape could ever outpower the strongest empire in the galaxy, right? "Can you? As I understand it, evacuating all 112 of your worlds would cripple your economy. I can't imagine the riots, the refugee crisis, and the lack of available resources, all while your government struggles to find new homes for all of those people," Calvin explained. "You can still miss. At such distances, you could never hope to accurately strike our planets. Well, it's a good thing I can throw sticks really damn well. Also, an onboard navigational AI is always something to appreciate." There was a pause as Vao struggled and ultimately failed to come up with a reasonable or realistic way this human's plan would fail. But there was nothing. It was a genius war strategy, though oddly reminiscent of conflicts pre-unification. His only saving bet is that this human was bluffing about his stockpile, that the single missile he fired was his first and last. But Vao didn't know even the rough material cost of such a device. It was a technology that the Themisian Empire had never really needed to develop, and so it was hard to discern whether such technology produced on mass scales would be plausible or even possible for a species of this technological inferiority. I know I can never defeat you. Your fleet is far too technologically advanced for me to thwart, but I can do the next best thing. I can take you down with me. Calvin says as though such a statement was benign. No, you are actually insane. You would sacrifice the pinnacle of civilization, the crown jewel of all life in this galaxy, out of spite? Calvin said nothing. He just stared at the camera with an unrelenting gaze that told Val all he needed to. The two sat in silence for what felt like hours, Val running through the options again and again while Calvin seemed to be dissecting and consuming a fruit of some sort, seemingly unconcerned with the situation at hand. Tell me, human, you present me with a two-pronged road. One leads to hell, the other also leads to hell. Should I attack, my empire will surely suffer more losses than it could possibly gain. Should I retreat, I would be executed for my cowardice and replaced with an admiral just as, if not more, ambitious, who may not believe your ploys and cause my race's demise. Should I annihilate you now and perhaps aid in staving off my species' destruction, or beg to a prideful and uncaring royalty to hear a plea that wouldn't make it past the middle courts, be executed and then see my species collapse in the far future when they send my replacement? Val demanded, not truly seeking a serious answer. How about instead you show them what I showed you? Calvin proposed. Val scoffed. As I said, Ape, the recordings here would only further display my cowardness. Flee at the sight of a single loss? Not the missile. Show them what happens when you don't back down. Show your higher-ups the road they're heading down and show this as their first and final warning, Calvin stated. Now Val was confused. What do you... Val was cut off as a new image appeared in a new window on the terminal screen, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, Val was at a loss for words. The rest of the bridge crew stood terrified at what they were seeing. The image left much to the imagination as to what horrific tragedy must have caused this desecration. Humanity has been set back 4,000 years because we couldn't swallow our pride, because we couldn't see the bigger picture or see which hills weren't worth dying on. We played the lives of billions like pieces on a board game. And if my sovereignty is threatened, if you're here to smother the spark of humanity once and for all, then I will gladly play one final game with you. Val looked back up at the human who he now realized truly had nothing to lose, who was being genuine about his madness, his spite, and his willingness to end it all. Calvin watched as the fleet jumped back into subspace and left his gravitonic sensors range. I've seen you pull off some bold diplomatic maneuvers, but this has to be one of your most audacious, Iris said. Calvin let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Fake it till you make it, I suppose, the engineer sighed. Or break it. Shall I set aside a period of your schedule for a celebratory hiatus dedicated to indulging in intoxicants? Iris asked. She knew him well enough to make these judgments. Calvin, against his right brain's wishes, shook his head. I cut out a lot of things in my life as a means of personal accountability. I'll get drunk when humanity is restored to a breeding population, Calvin said, walking across his pressurized residence over to a covered window. Do you truly believe resurrecting humanity as it died is a wise choice? Iris asked through the ceiling speakers. With you in charge, I'm unconcerned. Besides, you're a better strategist than any other human I can remember. Calvin grabbed the shades and pulled them back, revealing a dark, frozen hell filled with an invisible death that would fry any lesser man's genome. As the centuries went by, it became harder and harder to remember an Earth unpolluted by the wrath and folly of a generation long gone. A world where people like him could walk a surface without wearing an environmental suit, or leaving the tasks up to an army of drones. Calvin sighed. In a game where both sides can lose with a push of a button, the only winning move is not to play.